Hey, what you see behind me here is an effect that I've done for Valentine's Day, and coming up is how to make this thing from scratch in ShaderToy. I've also made a live wallpaper that looks exactly like that. So if you like the way this looks and you like the kind of videos that I'm putting out, then check that out as well. I put a video over there about this effect and an App Store link somewhere down there. All right, that's my shameless plug out of the way. Let's do this. So let's go to an empty scene. So over here, I basically just added a define for the smooth step that I usually add. And then I have renormalized my coordinates the way I normally do. And I have a black screen. So that's where we're starting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a circle in the middle of the screen. So for that, I'm gonna just get the distance to the center of the screen. I do that like that. And now I'm going to cut out a little circle with my smooth step. And let's say I do it like this. All right, and now I'm gonna have to set my color to my value C that I just created. And there I have a circle. So let's make it a little bit tighter by moving this up a little bit. All right. So now we're gonna have to shape this circle into a heart. So how can we do that? Well, what we could do for starters is for every column of this circle, for every pixel column, we can shift the circle up or down a little bit. So for instance, what I could do over here, if I do uv.y, so my y component of my UVs, let's just add the x component to that and see what happens there. I have to add it over there. So here you can see that that shifts the circle for every column a little bit. So, but obviously I don't want this, right? If I just go to Desmos, what I've just done is I just added this offset to everything. So what I would want is perhaps maybe something like that, so that it is symmetrical around the y-axis. So let's do that. So I do absolute value of the x, and then that puts stuff upside down. So let's turn that around with minus. All right, that's already kind of a heart. It's not the most beautiful heart though, because like over here it comes in at a 90-degree angle, right? Which is exactly what we would expect, because the absolute is a 90-degree angle. So let's shape that a little bit. So what we could do is we could take the square root of that number. So if we take the square root of the absolute value of x, and then I have to get rid of this. Now you see it kind of curves in nicely. So let's do that. So let's go back here. And now I say, okay, give me the square root of that. And now you see that shapes everything nicely, but obviously this is way too much. So I'm gonna have to scale that down. So let's say times 0.5. All right, so that's already a lot better. Now my heart is a little bit narrow, so let's stretch it out a little bit. So I do uv.x times equals 0.7, let's say. And that makes it wider. And why does it make it wider? Because you might think, well, shouldn't I multiply this by a number like 2 or a number larger than 1? Why is it smaller than 1? Well, that is because what we're actually stretching is the underlying coordinates. We're not stretching the heart, but we're stretching the coordinates. So if I just look at this, at the circle that we started with, so over here I'm saying the circle has a radius of 0.3, right? So meaning that x0 is over here and x.3 is over here. And supposedly x.6 would be over here, which is outside of the radius, therefore it's black over here. But if I take this and I multiply this whole thing by 1/2, then my original 0.6 over here would be 0.6 multiplied by 1/2 is 0.3. So let's see what happens. So you see that stretches the circle to here. So I hope that makes maybe more sense. All right, so let's get back here. And so now we have that. All right, great. So that's kind of the heart done. Now, if you go over here, if you have a look at this, you can see that these hearts, they can also get out of focus, right? I can change the focus with my mouse cursor like this. So what we need is a heart that we can blur. All right. So for that, let's go back here and let's see how we can make that blur. Well, a good place to start would be over here in my smooth step, because if I take my thresholds and I move them apart, then watch what happens. So if I make this smaller here, you can see that the edge gets more blurry. All right, so let's start here. So let's instead of this 0.3 here, let's just make a variable r for radius and set it to 0.3, and let's also put a variable here b for blur, and I will set that to, I don't know, to something small right now. And then let's just substitute them over here. So here it's my radius, and here it's also my radius minus that blur value, right? So now I have that, and now if I change my blur value, it would get blurrier. And also let's get the mouse involved here so we can easily test different values. So what I'm going to do here, so I'm going to do vec2 m. I'm going to take this. This is what ShaderToy gives us, iMouse, but that is in pixel coordinates, and we need to have that in a normalized coordinates. So I'm going to divide that whole thing by iResolution.xy. So now I have this m will be 0, 0 when my mouse is over here, and it will be 1, 1 when my mouse is over here. So now I can use this m to like link that to something. So I can do this, for instance. So now you can see that I can scale this. But my m goes from 0 to 1, meaning that my like if I do 0.3 minus 1, then this gets negative. So I don't want that. So I have to scale this to be in line with the radius. So like that. Okay, so now you see that it blurs a little bit less. And the other thing is that right now my blurry edge kind of goes away from my outer edge. So if my outer edge is here, my inner edge is here, it's just only my inner edge that is moving right now. So it looks like the heart is shrinking at the same time, which we don't want. So for that, I can just add that same blur value over here so that both my inner edge and my outer edge are moving apart. All right, so now you can see that the edge stays at the same location, and it kind of blurs on both sides. All right, great. So let's move this down a little bit because the heart is too far up. So I'm going to do uv.y minus equals 0.1. Okay, that was the wrong direction, so I'm going to do plus equals to move it down a little bit. And also it's a little bit too large because when I blur it, it kind of clips the edges, which I don't want. So I'm going to do times 0.25. So now when I blur it, it kind of stays neatly within the boundaries. All right, so now there is one obvious issue with this, which is that we have this ugly edge in the middle, and that is because when we go over here, over here it really comes in vertically. And so what I would want is when it blurs, I would want to kind of clip this out so that it doesn't get all the way over here. So what I could do, if I call this A over here, I could say, well, give me the maximum between A and B. All right, and for B, we will use our blur value, which is between 0 and 1, or 0 and 0.3, let's say. So now, if you just look at the red here, when my blur increases, it slowly starts cutting off that bottom trench. Okay, so let's go back and implement that. So over here, instead of just having this, I say, well, give me the max between this and the blur value. All right, so let's see. So now you can see that as I start blurring, it starts cutting off the bottom edge. All right, so, well, that kind of worked, but we still have a big issue, which is that we can still see these edges over here, right? I can still see this over here and over there. And that is because we have a discontinuity over here, right? We have a kink over here. So to get rid of that, instead of max, we're going to use a different function called smooth max, and I did a whole video about that. Go check that out over here if you want to know how that works. But for now, I'm just going to implement that. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say float smooth max, smax, and it takes in an A, and it takes in a B, and it takes in a K value. And then inside of here, I'm going to do float H equals clamp, and then I'm going to do B minus A divided by K plus 0.5, and then I'm going to clamp that between 0 and 1. And again, if you don't know what I'm doing, check out my other video, or not, you could just follow along what I'm doing here. And then I'm going to return the mix of A and B and H, and I'm going to subtract from that H times 1 minus H times K times 1/2. And because this is a max, a smooth maximum, I have to add it here instead of subtract it. I hope I did that right, so let's see. So now instead of our max function, we're going to use a smooth max function, and with a smooth value of 0.1. So let's see. Did you see that? It just got rid of the edge. How beautiful is that? All right, so you can play around with these values to make it even smoother, but I guess I'm gonna leave it like that. All right, so now when I'm blurring it, like it looks like the heart shifts up a little bit, so I can compensate for that by subtracting my blur value here, or adding it, and that's too much, so I'm just gonna add half to kind of keep it in the middle. All right, so now I have a nice blurry heart. Awesome. All right, so the next thing is I'm gonna put this into its own function. So I'm gonna go here, float heart, that's gonna take in a UV coordinate, and it's gonna take in a blur value. And then I'm gonna take this thing, copy this whole thing, or cut this thing out and put it over here. And now my B value I already have, right? So I'm just gonna multiply my B by this radius over here. And then over here, I can just return this value C. Return. All right, and now here I can say float C equals heart UV, comma, and for my blur value, I'm gonna do the Y component of my mouse. All right, so now I have that neatly packed into a function. So let's make this red. And for that, I'm gonna use a define again, because we might use that in multiple places. So I'm gonna do define heart color, and you can pick any color you want as long as it is red. So 1, and then generally I don't like to use 0 for any of the RGB values, because if you don't use 0 and you end up multiplying a number by a very large number, then it slowly goes to white, which looks a lot nicer. So just as a general rule, if you want like red or green or blue, then don't make the other channels completely 0. So what I'll do is I'll make the other channels some small value. Okay, so now I have my heart color, and now I can go over here and multiply that by my heart color. And now we have a beautiful red blurry heart. Oh, there's actually one thing here, that sometimes this can happen, that it inverts. And the reason why that happens is because my blur value here, my B, can get all the way to 0. And when it is all the way 0, then this threshold and this threshold will be the same. And that's what causes sometimes the thing to invert. So what I want to do is I want to subtract a tiny value from here, just to make sure that my second threshold is always lower than my first one. All right, so that will get rid of that issue for me. All right, that's the end of the first video. I hope you like it, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.